The notification hit Teresa Roundtree's phone at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, right as she was presenting a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical rebranding strategy to a conference room full of executives who looked exhausted before she even started. She ignored it, professional to her core, even as her presentation was being torn apart by a skeptical CFO who clearly hadn't bothered reading the market analysis she'd sent 4 times. The second notification came 45 seconds later. Then a third. A fourth. Her phone, face down on the polished mahogany table, began vibrating with the persistence of a small earthquake. "Ms. Roundtree," the CFO said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Is that urgent?" Teresa smiled, the smile she'd perfected over 9 years of corporate warfare. Sweet enough to seem apologetic, sharp enough to remind him she wasn't his secretary. "I apologize. I'll silence it completely." She reached for the phone, intending to do exactly that, and caught a glimpse of the screen. Instagram. 43 notifications and counting. All from the same post. Her stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the lukewarm coffee she'd been sipping since 8 a.m. She knew, with the certainty of someone who'd spent the last 6 months trying to convince herself she'd imagined the weight of a certain pair of dark eyes following her through rooms, across lobbies, into coffee shops, exactly who was responsible. Elliot Rubinstein. He didn't use social media. He had people for that. 3 of them, in fact, whose sole job was to monitor what was said about him, his family, and his interests across every platform that mattered. Teresa Roundtree had apparently become an interest. She didn't know that, of course. She thought their connection began and ended with the fact that her firm had been hired to rebrand one of his legitimate businesses, a chain of upscale steakhouses that needed a fresh image after the previous owner got tangled up in a federal investigation. She thought the twice-weekly meetings were about market positioning and logo concepts. She thought he kept her late last Tuesday to discuss campaign strategy, not because he wanted to see if she'd push back against his suggestions with the same fire she showed everyone else. He had. And he'd enjoyed it immensely. Introduction: Inside Elliot's World. Across the city, in a glass-walled office on the 47th floor overlooking Chicago's skyline, Elliot Rubinstein was having a very different afternoon. Marcus, his right hand, appeared in the doorway with a tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. "You asked me to flag any social media activity involving Ms. Roundtree." Elliot didn't look up from the contract he was reviewing. His focus was absolute, a trait that had made him dangerous in business and deadly in every other aspect of his life. And someone tagged her in photos. Multiple photos from last night. That got his attention. Elliot set down his pen with deliberate precision and extended his hand for the tablet without looking up. When he finally did, his dark eyes moved across the screen with the same attention he gave to contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The photos loaded one by one. A restaurant downtown. Dim lighting. Craft cocktails and expensive glassware. Teresa sat across from a man Elliot didn't recognize. Blonde hair. Expensive suit that didn't quite fit right. Smile too wide for someone on what appeared to be a first or second date. The caption read, "Amazing night with this beautiful woman. Can't wait to see her again." Monty Phillips had tagged her in all 7 photos. Elliot studied each one with meticulous precision. In the first photo, Teresa was laughing, her head tilted back, dark skin catching the restaurant's warm light. The second showed her mid-conversation, animated hands gesturing the way they did when she was making a point she believed in deeply. The third was a selfie, Monty's arm draped around her shoulders. Teresa wasn't leaning into him. Elliot noticed that immediately. Her posture was polite but distant, her smile genuine but not intimate. She looked the way she looked in their meetings, engaged but untouchable. Professional. Safe. Still, his jaw tightened. "Who is he?" Elliot asked, his voice flat. The kind of flat that made experienced men nervous. Marcus had anticipated the question. He'd known his boss long enough to recognize when something had shifted in the room. "Monty Phillips. Works in finance. Mutual friends with Ms. Roundtree through her college roommate. This appears to be their second date. Elliot's fingers tightened on the tablet's edge. Second date. That was 2 dates more than Elliot had allowed to happen before he decided Teresa Roundtree belonged to him. Before he decided to stop watching from the shadows and make a statement so public, so undeniable, that every man in the city would understand one simple fact. She was his. And everyone was about to know it. What happens next will shock you. Because in the next 9 minutes, you're going to watch a woman go from invisible to claimed. You're going to see a love story that rewrites everything you thought you knew about possession, protection, and what it really means to be seen. And trust me, you do not want to miss the moment when she finally understands that some men don't ask permission. They rewrite the rules. If you want to see how this unfolds, hit subscribe now because this story is about to get absolutely insane. Teresa's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She'd made it through the CFO's interrogation by the skin of her teeth, excusing herself from the conference room with a promise to refine the demographics section by end of day. Now she sat alone in her office on the 34th floor, door closed, hands shaking as she opened Instagram. The first comment was already there. Under Monty's first photo, the one where he had his arm around her shoulders at the bar, a single line from an account she didn't recognize, "She's taken." Teresa's breath caught. She scrolled. The second photo. Another comment from the same account. "Back off." Third photo. "She's mine." By the fourth photo, there were 3 comments stacked on top of each other, each one more possessive than the last. Teresa's fingers moved frantically across her screen, clicking on the account. The profile picture was dark, obscured. No posts. No followers visible. No information. Just a username, Elliot Rubinstein. Elliot Rubinstein. The name meant nothing to her, and yet it meant everything. Because suddenly, standing in her climate-controlled office 40 stories above Chicago, Teresa understood. The meetings that ran long. The way he always positioned himself where he could see her. The intensity in his dark eyes when she presented ideas. The questions he asked that went deeper than any client should care about. Not about her work. About her. Her thoughts. Her opinions. What made her angry? What made her laugh? She'd told herself it was professional interest. That he was simply thorough. She'd lied to herself. Her hands trembled as she refreshed the Instagram post. 17 new comments. All from the same account. All variations of the same message. She clicked on Monty's profile, scrolled back through his recent posts, and her stomach twisted. He had photos of them everywhere. The restaurant. The bar. A selfie she didn't remember him taking where she was caught mid-laugh. And under every single one, in the comments section, was Elliot Rubinstein. Claiming her like she was property. Like she was his to claim. The rational part of Teresa's brain screamed that this was insane. Men didn't do this. Powerful men didn't stalk women through social media. They didn't leave public declarations of ownership. They didn't. But apparently, they did. At least this one did. Teresa did what she should have done minutes ago. She searched his name. Elliot Rubinstein. Chicago. Real estate. The results flooded her screen. Articles about real estate developments. A photo of him at a charity gala, looking like he owned not just the building but the entire city. Business profiles. News clips. Whispers in forums about connections to organized crime, about businesses that operated in the gray areas, about a man who got what he wanted and made anyone who stood in his way regret it. Her office suddenly felt too small. The notifications kept coming. Instagram was relentless. 32 comments now. 35. Each one a brand, a mark, a public statement that Teresa Roundtree was no longer available. The entire city could see it. Her colleagues could see it. Monty could see it. Most terrifying of all, she could see it. And what she saw was a man who didn't ask for permission. A man who saw something he wanted and took it. A man who had apparently been watching her long enough to know the exact moment she'd go on a date with someone else, and who had the power and the audacity to make his displeasure known to anyone with an internet connection. Teresa set her phone down on her desk like it was a live grenade. One thought consumed her, loud and unavoidable. What was Elliot Rubinstein going to do next? Teresa sent the message that night, her fingers trembling as she typed. Her phone sat on her kitchen counter, screen glowing in the darkness of her apartment. She'd spent 3 hours staring at his Instagram profile before she worked up the courage to message him directly through the platform's private messaging system. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Reverie Coffee. 10 a.m. Alone. His response came within minutes. A single word, done. The next morning, Teresa arrived at Reverie Coffee 15 minutes early. She needed the advantage of being there first, of choosing the corner table in the back, of having the exit within sight. She ordered her usual cappuccino and sat, her leg bouncing under the table with a nervous energy she couldn't control. He walked in at exactly 10 a.m. Teresa had seen his photos online, had glimpsed him in passing during their business meetings, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of Elliot Rubinstein in person. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it 100 times that morning. His suit was impeccable, tailored perfectly to his frame. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Dark. Intelligent. Completely certain. He ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu and made his way to her table like he'd always known exactly where she'd be sitting. Teresa. He said her name like it was something he'd been waiting to say out loud for a very long time. He sat across from her without asking permission, his coffee untouched on the table between them. How dare you, she started, her voice sharp and controlled. You don't know me. You have no right to. I know you take a cappuccino with an extra shot, he interrupted, gesturing to her cup. You always arrive at your office by 7:45 a.m., even though you don't need to be there until 9. You eat lunch at your desk 3 days a week. On Thursdays, you go home, order Thai food from the place on Ashland Avenue, and you cry alone in your apartment while you watch something mindless on Netflix. Usually by 10 p.m., you're asleep. Teresa's blood went cold. You're stalking me, she whispered. I'm protecting you, he corrected, and there was no arrogance in his voice. Just fact. There's a difference. One you're about to understand. He leaned forward slightly, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her to her seat. Monty Phillips, Elliot said quietly. You went on 2 dates with him. Did he ever mention his business? His investment portfolio? Anything about how he makes his money? Teresa shook her head slowly. That's because he was being deliberately vague. Monty Phillips is under federal investigation for securities fraud. Wire fraud. Embezzlement. The people he's been working with are dangerous, Teresa. The kind of dangerous that doesn't care about collateral damage. When they found out he was dating you, when they started asking questions about who you are and what you know, it became a problem. How could you possibly? Because I have sources in the FBI. Because I make it my business to know everything that happens in this city. Because the moment you became connected to him, you became vulnerable. He reached across the table, and Teresa flinched, but he only slid a folder toward her. Inside were documents. Articles about Monty's investigation. Photos of him with men whose names appeared in news stories about organized crime. The date of his arrest, scheduled for next week. The Instagram comments, Elliot continued, were a necessary precaution. Once the city knows you belong to me, no one touches you. Not Monty. Not his associates. Not anyone. Teresa stared at the documents, her mind reeling. That's not protection, she said finally. That's ownership. Elliot met her eyes across the table, and something dangerous flickered in his expression. Perhaps, he said softly. But at least you'll be alive to debate the semantics. 3 days passed in silence. Teresa told herself she was done with Elliot Rubinstein. That the coffee shop confrontation had been closure, an ending, a final warning to stay away from a man who operated in shadows and claimed women like property. She threw herself into work. She ignored the way her eyes kept drifting to her phone. She forced herself to delete his contact information, as if erasing his number would erase the way his dark eyes had looked at her across the table. It didn't work. On Thursday evening, a text arrived from an unknown number. Just an image attachment. A photograph of a blue dress. Silk. Elegant. The kind of dress that screamed money and submission. Below the photo, a single line, "Wear this. 8 p.m. Russo's on Michigan Avenue." Teresa read it twice, anger rising in her throat like bile. She blocked the number immediately. 20 minutes later, another message came through from a different number. The same dress. The same address. The same assumption that she would obey. She blocked that one too. By the time the third message arrived, she'd stopped blocking and started typing. "I don't take orders from anyone." His response was instantaneous, 8 p.m. Teresa spent the next 2 hours in her closet, fueled by pure rage. She showered. She did her makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. And then she deliberately, methodically, chose a red dress. Not just any red. A deep, blood-red dress that clung to every curve, that made a statement, that screamed defiance. She paired it with heels that could kill a man and left her apartment at 7:55 p.m. with the singular goal of reminding Elliot Rubinstein that she wasn't a doll to be dressed. Russo's was exactly the kind of restaurant she expected from him. Upscale. Exclusive. The kind of place where the waiters knew your name before you arrived. Elliot was already seated at a corner table when she walked in, and she watched his expression shift the moment he saw her. His dark eyes traveled the length of her body, lingering on the red dress, and then something dangerous crossed his face. A smile. Not the polite corporate smile she'd seen in their business meetings. This was raw, predatory, hungry. "Red," he said as she sat down across from him, not bothering with pleasantries. "Interesting choice." "I don't follow instructions," Teresa said flatly. "I noticed." He leaned back in his chair, that dangerous smile never wavering. "I was hoping you would." "Then you're going to be disappointed a lot." "No," he said, and something in his voice made her breath catch. "I don't think I will be." The waiter appeared, took their orders, disappeared. Elliot didn't touch his wine. He simply watched her, the way he always did, like he was reading something written on her skin that only he could see. "You think I want to control you," he said finally. "Don't you?" "If I wanted to control you, I wouldn't have sent the dress." He leaned forward slightly. "I would have assumed you'd wear it." "There's a difference, Teresa. Control is about compliance. What I want is choice. Your choice. But I need you to make the right one. And if I don't? Then at least you'll make it with your eyes open. At least you'll know exactly what you're refusing." He paused. The blue dress was a test. The red dress is an answer. And that answer tells me everything I need to know about you. Teresa wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him he didn't know her, couldn't know her, had no right to presume anything about her choices. But the words died on her tongue because she saw something in his eyes in that moment. Not arrogance. Not possession. Recognition. He was looking at her like he'd been waiting his entire life for her to show up in a red dress and prove she was dangerous. The dinner stretched into hours. Elliot ordered without asking what she wanted, and Teresa found herself eating food she hadn't chosen, in a restaurant she hadn't agreed to, with a man who had essentially stalked her into this moment. And yet, she didn't leave. She told herself it was because she was gathering information, understanding her enemy, mapping his psychology. She knew it was a lie the moment she caught herself smiling at something he said about his mother's obsession with opera. By the time dessert arrived, the restaurant had emptied. The waiters moved like ghosts, careful not to disturb the strange electricity that crackled between them. "I want to show you something," Elliot said, pushing his plate away. "Give me 20 minutes. After that, if you want to leave, you walk out that door and I never contact you again. You have my word." Teresa should have said no. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to walk away from this man who treated boundaries like suggestions. But she was curious. And curiosity, she was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous than fear. 20 minutes, she agreed. Not a second more. He stood, extended his hand. Teresa hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, warm, and the moment his skin touched hers, something shifted in her chest like a lock turning. He drove her in a black car with tinted windows through downtown Chicago. They didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward. It was expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. They pulled up outside the Southside boxing gym at 11:47 p.m. The building was dark except for one light glowing in the back. "What are we doing here?" Teresa asked. "Watch." He led her through the gym, past rows of heavy bags and speedballs, to a back office. Through the glass window, she could see into the boxing ring. Elliot walked to the door and stepped inside. Before Teresa could process what was happening, he began to move. She'd never seen anything like it. His body became an instrument of controlled violence. Every punch was precise. Every movement calculated. But it wasn't anger fueling him. It was something else. Something raw and desperate and beautiful in its intensity. He moved like someone fighting demons, like someone trying to beat something out of his own skin. 10 minutes in, he was shirtless, sweat running down his muscled chest. 15 minutes, and his knuckles were bleeding. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. And Teresa understood in that moment that this was what he wanted her to see. Not his strength. His struggle. At exactly the 20-minute mark, he stopped. He hung there against the ropes, breathing hard, his dark eyes finding hers through the glass window. He didn't look triumphant. He looked devastated. Teresa found herself moving toward him before she could think. She climbed through the ropes and stood in front of him, and without allowing herself time to second-guess, she reached out and touched his chest. His heart was hammering beneath her palm. "What was that?" she whispered. "That," Elliot said, his voice rough, "is what I feel when I think about you. That's what you do to me, Teresa. That's why I need you safe. Because if anything happened to you, I wouldn't just bleed. I'd destroy everything in my path." He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, and his touch was gentle despite the violence still radiating from his body. 20 minutes are up, he said. "So what's your answer? Do you walk out that door?" Teresa stood there, her hands still on his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow beneath her fingers. She thought about safety. She thought about the life she'd been living, small and controlled and empty. She thought about the red dress and the way he'd smiled when he saw it. She thought about the fact that he was right. There was a difference between control and protection. And she was no longer sure she wanted to leave. The text arrived on Sunday morning, "Dinner tonight. 7 p.m. Lucia's on the North Shore. Where's something nice?" Teresa stared at the message for a full minute before responding. She told herself she was going to a business dinner. That Elliot was introducing her to a client, or a partner, or someone important to one of his legitimate enterprises. She told herself a lot of things as she showered and dressed in a black dress that was elegant without trying too hard. None of it was true. She knew at the moment Elliot opened the door to the private dining room at Lucia's and she saw them. His family. Not just his mother, though the woman who rose from the head of the table was unmistakably Lucia Rubinstein. Sharp-eyed. Silver-haired. Wearing a red dress that matched the authority in her posture. But also his brother Marcus, who had Elliot's dark eyes and a scarred knuckle that suggested he'd spent time in the boxing ring. His sister Francesca, who was beautiful in a way that made other women jealous and men nervous. and assorted aunts, uncles, cousins. An entire ecosystem of Rubinsteins, all turning to look at her like she was a specimen under glass. "Teresa," Lucia said, rising from her seat. Finally. Teresa's hand was taken before she could respond, pulled into an embrace that was surprisingly warm for a woman who looked like she could order a man's disappearance without blinking. Lucia smelled like garlic and olive oil and something expensive. She held Teresa at arm's length and studied her face with an intensity that made Teresa feel like she was being assessed for weaknesses. "Elliot said you were beautiful," Lucia announced to the table. "He didn't mention the spine." "That's good. That's very good." The dinner was unlike anything Teresa had experienced. Lucia loaded her plate with homemade pasta, with roasted vegetables, with bread still warm from the kitchen. Every time Teresa's plate was half empty, more food appeared. Lucia watched her eat like she was gauging Teresa's worthiness through her appetite. Between courses, they talked. Marcus asked her about her work. Francesca, with a knowing smile, asked her how long she'd been involved with Elliot. Teresa started to correct her. They weren't involved, they weren't, but Lucia cut her off. "She's wondering if you understand what you're getting into," Lucia said, not unkindly. "They all are. We all are." "I'm not getting into anything," Teresa said carefully. "No?" Lucia leaned back in her chair, a glass of wine held delicately in her weathered hands. "My husband claimed me in front of his entire family at my father's restaurant. I was engaged to someone else at the time. He walked in, looked at me, and told my fiancé to go home. My fiancé left. I married my husband 3 months later." She gestured around the table with her glass. Marcus's wife stood up to him in public. Called him out for being controlling. He loved her for it so much he proposed that same night. Francesca's partner? She walked into a room full of people who wanted to intimidate her, and she smiled like she owned the place. "Now she's part of this family, and we would die for her." Lucia turned her full attention back to Teresa. "My son has been watching you for 6 months. He doesn't do anything halfway, Teresa. When Elliot wants something, he takes it. But he doesn't take women who don't want to be taken. That's not how we work. We claim fiercely, but we choose carefully." "What if I don't want to be claimed?" Teresa asked. Lucia smiled, and it was knowing, dangerous, warm. "Then you wouldn't be here." But Lucia's words are about to haunt her. Because 3 days later, Teresa is going to walk into that gym, and she's going to demand something from Elliot that will change everything between them. She's going to demand his truth. His raw, unfiltered, dangerous truth. And what happens in the boxing ring in the next few minutes is going to be the moment that breaks everything they've both been holding back. If you think you know where this is going, you're about to be proven completely wrong. Keep watching. Teresa didn't plan to go to the gym. She told herself that as she sat in her apartment on Friday night, unable to focus on work, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about Lucia's words. About being claimed. About family loyalty that ran deeper than blood. About a man who had spent 6 months watching her, and who still hadn't tried to force her hand. By 10 p.m., she was driving to the south side. The gym was nearly empty at that hour. Just Elliot in the ring, moving like he had been the night he'd shown her what she did to him. But this time was different. This time, there was no audience. No performance. Just a man fighting something invisible, something internal, something that lived in the space between his ribs. Teresa stood in the shadows and watched. He moved with an economy of motion that was almost meditative. Each punch landed with precision, not anger. His breathing was controlled, rhythmic, like a prayer. Sweat ran down his body, darkening the waistband of his black gym pants. His knuckles were wrapped but bleeding anyway, small crimson drops falling onto the mat. She'd never seen anything more beautiful or more terrifying. He saw her eventually. His eyes found hers across the gym, and for a moment, he froze. Then he finished his combination, stepped out of the ring, and grabbed a towel. He didn't speak. He just looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for months. In the office, he sat heavily on the edge of his desk while Teresa stood by the door, uncertain of what she was doing here, what she wanted from him, what any of this meant. Elliot unwrapped his knuckles slowly, methodically, revealing the raw skin beneath. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. "Why?" "Because I'm trying very hard not to touch you, and you standing there in that dress is making that extremely difficult." Teresa looked down at what she was wearing. A simple sweater. Jeans. Nothing designed to seduce. And yet the way he was looking at her made her feel like she was naked. "I'm terrified," Elliot said abruptly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Do you understand that? I've built an empire. I've made decisions that changed the course of men's lives. I've stood in rooms with people who would kill for me, and I've never been afraid. Not once. Not until you." He stood, and Teresa's breath caught, but he didn't move toward her. He stayed where he was, hands clenched at his sides. "I've spent my entire life in control. Of everything. Of everyone. And then you walked into a rebrand meeting, and you told me my restaurant's branding was dated, and suddenly I couldn't control anything anymore. I couldn't control the fact that I wanted to see you. Couldn't control the fact that I had you followed. Couldn't control the fact that when I saw you on a date with another man, I wanted to burn the city down." His voice was raw, stripped of the polished veneer she'd seen in boardrooms and business meetings. "I don't want to control you, Teresa. I want you to stay. I want you to choose me. I want you to look at me the way you're looking at me right now for the rest of your life. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. You're choosing a man who loves fiercely and possessively and without apology. You're choosing a life that isn't safe. You're choosing me." He extended his hand, palm up, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "So I'm asking you now. Not demanding. Asking. Stay." Teresa stared at his outstretched hand. The question hung between them like an unresolved note in a symphony, waiting for her to complete the melody. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. 3 days. That's how long Teresa lasted before she was back at the gym. 3 days of pretending to work while her mind replayed his words. 3 days of ignoring her phone. 3 days of lying awake at night, staring at her ceiling, feeling the weight of his outstretched hand like a phantom touch against her palm. 3 days of understanding, with absolute clarity, that she was falling into something she couldn't control, and she didn't want to control it anymore. She found him sparring with Marcus in the ring. Both men were shirtless, brutal in their efficiency. Marcus threw a combination. Elliot slipped it, countered, pulled his punch at the last second. Always holding back. Always calculating. Always protecting. Always so careful. Teresa climbed through the ropes before she could second-guess herself. Before reason could catch up with her racing heart. "Get out of the ring," Elliot said, not even looking at her. His voice was sharp, commanding, the CEO voice she knew from their business meetings. "No." That got his attention. He turned, and she watched his expression shift. Confusion. Then something darker. Something hungry. "Teresa, this isn't safe. I don't want safe." She stepped closer, and Marcus wisely climbed out of the ring, taking the young fighter with him. "I'm tired of safe. I'm tired of you holding back. I'm tired of you treating me like I'm fragile. You don't understand what you're asking for. Then show me." She stopped in front of him, tilted her head back to meet his eyes. "No more control. No more protection. No more careful. I want you. All of you. The real thing. No filters. No safety measures." Elliot stared at her for a long moment. His jaw clenched. His fists unclenched and clenched again. She could see him warring with himself, see the struggle play out across his face like a storm gathering behind his eyes. "If you do this, he said quietly, if you ask me for this, there's no going back. I know. You'll be mine, Teresa. Completely. Irrevocably. Not because I'm controlling you, but because you chose me. And once you make that choice, I won't let you take it back. I know. He moved so fast she barely had time to breathe. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair, and then his mouth was on hers. Hard. Demanding. Uncompromising. It wasn't a kiss. It was a claim. It was a promise. It was a warning written in the language of his lips and his tongue and the low growl that vibrated against her mouth. He kissed her like he'd been waiting months for this moment, like he'd memorized the taste of her from across rooms and through phone screens, like she was the only thing that made sense in his carefully constructed world of shadow and power. Teresa kissed him back with equal intensity. She pulled him closer, demanded more, refused to let him hold anything back. When he broke the kiss, they were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the middle of the boxing ring. No more hiding, she whispered. No more hiding, he agreed. He kissed her again, slower this time but no less intense, and Teresa heard Marcus whistle low from outside the ring. She heard the young fighter laugh. She heard the world shifting on its axis. And she understood, with absolute certainty, that everything had changed. There was no going back now. There was only forward, into whatever Elliot Rubinstein was offering, whatever it meant to be claimed by a man who loved like a storm. Teresa's apartment smelled like Elliot. His cologne lingered on her sheets, on her clothes, in the air itself. She'd spent the last week in a daze, moving between her office and the gym, between stolen moments with him and the life she was supposed to be living. Her colleagues had started asking questions. Her mother had called 3 times. The world was continuing on around her while she existed in a bubble of intensity and possession and a love that felt like drowning. She was making coffee on Monday morning when the knock came. Lucia Rubinstein stood in her doorway wearing a cream-colored coat and carrying a box of fresh pastries from her restaurant. She didn't wait for an invitation. She simply walked past Teresa into the apartment like she owned it, like she'd been expected all along. Sit, Lucia commanded, setting the pastries on Teresa's kitchen table. Teresa sat. Lucia unwrapped the box and laid out cannoli, sfogliatelle, biscotti. She poured coffee without asking how Teresa took it, added cream and 1 sugar, and set the cup in front of her with the precision of a ritual. Once you sit at our table, Lucia said, settling into the chair across from Teresa, you are family. And family is forever. It is not a threat. It is a fact. Teresa picked up her coffee. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. I see how he looks at you, Lucia continued, reaching across the table to take Teresa's hand. Her grip was firm, warm, and infinitely strong. I've watched my son for 34 years. I watched him build an empire. I watched him turn himself into stone, into power, into something untouchable. And then you walked into his life, and I watched him crack open. You are the woman he's been waiting for. The one he was willing to burn cities for. Lucia squeezed her hand. But you need to understand what you're choosing, Teresa. This life is not for the faint of heart. My husband was not a gentleman. He was powerful and possessive and sometimes dangerous. But he loved me with an intensity that rewrote the rules of my world. He showed me that I was capable of so much more than I ever imagined. When I chose him, I chose all of it. The danger. The loyalty. The way he would stand in front of a bullet meant for me without hesitation. The way his family would become my family, and we would protect each other fiercely, sometimes brutally. She released Teresa's hand and picked up her own coffee. Elliot is his father's son in every way that matters. He will love you completely or not at all. There are no half measures with the Rubinsteins. When we choose you with everything we have. And we will not let you go. Not for safety. Not for convention. Not for anything. Lucia stood and walked to Teresa's window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 3 men came to my restaurant last week, she said quietly. They were asking questions about you. About your background. About whether you were a liability. I had a conversation with them. A very persuasive conversation. She turned back to face Teresa. They will not bother you again. You are Rubinstein now, whether you've married him or not. And no one touches what belongs to us. She moved to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. The Sunday dinner is this week. 7 o'clock. Bring nothing. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. And Teresa? Lucia's dark eyes, so like her son's, held a warning and a promise in equal measure. Come prepared to be interrogated by everyone who matters in our world. Come prepared to prove you're strong enough for this life. Then she was gone, leaving behind only the scent of her perfume and the weight of everything Teresa had just accepted. Teresa arrived at the Rubinstein family estate on Sunday evening at precisely 6:55 p.m. The house was a sprawling mansion on the North Shore, all marble and dark wood and the kind of understated wealth that spoke of old money and older power. She wore black, because she'd learned that color in this family meant something. Black was armor. Black was power. Black was the choice of a woman who understood the game and was willing to play it. Elliot met her at the door. He wore a dark suit, his hair perfectly styled, and the moment his eyes found hers, everything else disappeared. He took her hand, brought it to his lips, and she felt the entire room shift at the gesture. You came, he said simply. I came. He led her into a dining room that could seat 30. But tonight, only 15 people filled the table. Lucia at the head. Marcus and his wife on one side. Francesca and her partner on the other. And the rest, aunts, uncles, cousins. The inner circle of the Rubinstein family. The people who mattered. The interrogation began before the first course was served. An uncle she hadn't met asked about her family background. An aunt questioned her career ambitions. A cousin wanted to know if she understood what she was getting into. Teresa answered each question with honesty and steel. She didn't apologize for her intelligence. She didn't diminish her accomplishments. She didn't pretend to be smaller than she was. She met their intensity with her own. Marcus's wife caught her eye across the table and nodded, a gesture of recognition. Francesca smiled like she was watching someone pass a test she'd taken herself. The room began to shift. The questions became less interrogation and more conversation. They started asking her opinions. They started listening to her answers like they mattered. By the time dessert arrived, an older uncle was arguing with her about pharmaceutical policy. She was holding her own. She was brilliant. She was fierce. She was exactly what the Rubinsteins had been waiting to see. Lucia stood. The table went silent. I want to introduce you to the newest member of our family, Lucia said, raising her glass. Her dark eyes found Teresa across the table. Teresa Roundtree has proven tonight that she is strong enough for this life. Smart enough. Fierce enough. She will not apologize for who she is, and we will not ask her to. She has chosen us. And we have chosen her. Lucia extended her glass toward Teresa. To family. To loyalty. To a woman who walked into our world and refused to be diminished. Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone drank. And in that moment, Teresa felt something click into place inside her chest. She had crossed a threshold. She had walked into the Rubinstein family not as a guest or a conquest, but as a member. As someone who belonged. After dinner, Elliot took her onto the terrace that overlooked Lake Michigan. The city lights spread out below them like a promise. You were magnificent in there, he said, pulling her close. They were testing me. They were. And you passed every test. He cupped her face in his hands. I want to marry you, Teresa. I want to make it official. I want the entire city to know that you're mine, and I'm yours, and there's no going back from that. Teresa looked at this man who had claimed her so publicly, so fiercely, so completely. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, playing it safe, disappearing into boredom. She thought about the woman she was now, standing on a terrace with a man who loved her like a storm. Yes, she said. He kissed her as the city lights glittered below them, and 6 months later, Teresa stood in a chapel in downtown Chicago in a white dress. Elliot waited at the altar. Their eyes met and the entire room disappeared. She had chosen the jump. She had chosen the risk. She had chosen a love that demanded everything and gave back infinitely more. She had never been more alive. That's how you know you found the right person. Not because it's safe. Not because it's easy. But because when you choose them, you're not just choosing love. You're choosing to finally become who you've always been meant to be. If this story did what it should have done, if Teresa's transformation just rewired something inside you, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because I have more stories like this coming, and you're not going to want to miss a single one. The stories about people who chose passion over fear. Who chose to be seen. Who chose the jump.